The ocean was louder than the phone. That was the first thing Margaret Thompson noticed. Waves thudding against the seawall outside her new villa drowned out the angry vibration of her cell, which sat face down on the marble counter. Seagulls wheeled overhead, and in the glass of the sliding doors she caught her reflection, a woman standing alone, champagne in hand, with the look of someone who had finally done something irreversible. 3 days earlier, she'd blown out 64 candles in silence. No family gathered around, no surprise dinner. Just a text from her son Brian that read, "Rain check, Mom. Patricia isn't well again. We'll celebrate soon." The word soon had grown stale after years of being pushed around like an unwanted package. She had stopped believing in it sometime between her husband's funeral and her 5th forgotten birthday. Now here she was, barefoot on imported tile, staring out at a horizon that actually belonged to her. The deed was signed. The wire cleared. And the villa, a sleek modern shell of glass and stone clinging to the Connecticut coast, was hers alone. The phone buzzed again. Brian, no doubt, wondering if she had finally lost her mind. For years he had kept her under his quiet supervision, joint accounts for emergencies, alerts set to ping whenever she spent more than $1,000, endless reminders about staying practical. She had played along, pretending not to notice the patronizing tone, the sideways glances exchanged between him and Sarah, his well-polished wife. But this time, Margaret hadn't asked permission. She slid open the door and stepped onto the deck. The air smelled like salt and possibility. Below, the tide dragged foam across the rocks, pulling and releasing as if testing her resolve. She raised her glass. "To myself," she whispered. The word startled her, like a prayer said out loud after years of silence. Inside, the phone erupted again, this time with a string of notifications so relentless it sounded almost desperate. Margaret let it play out. For once, she wasn't the one waiting on their attention. The villa gleamed around her, empty but alive with promise. A stage set for the next act. And in that suspended moment, she understood, tonight, the story was hers. By morning, Margaret's kitchen smelled of fresh coffee and defiance. She sat at the island with the newspaper spread out, the villa's wide windows pouring in light that made the stainless steel appliances look like they'd been polished for company. She almost laughed at the thought. Company hadn't been part of her life for years, not on her birthday, not on holidays, not when she needed it most. Her phone lit up again. 21 missed calls since last night. Brian's name topped the list, Sarah's followed, and, of all people, Patricia Wells had even left a voicemail. Margaret pressed play. "Margaret, it's Patricia. We're concerned. This isn't like you. Call me back, dear." Margaret sipped her coffee slowly. The nerve. Patricia, who managed to fall ill with clockwork precision every March. Patricia, whose crises had erased Margaret's birthday from the family calendar 6 years running. Margaret could still picture the last one vividly. She'd been promised dinner, only to find Brian and Sarah smiling in a restaurant booth with Patricia the next evening, champagne flutes raised. Not even hiding it. The bitterness still stung, but today it carried a strange sweetness. She was no longer invisible. A memory flickered of Aunt Helen, sharp-eyed and unapologetic, telling her once over lunch, "The worst thing you can do, Margaret, is let people decide who you are for their convenience." Helen had died quietly last year, leaving Margaret not only with a fortune but also with words that now felt like a dare. The phone vibrated again, rattling against the counter. Margaret flipped it over, finally answering. "Mom? Thank God. Where are you?" Brian's voice was tight, clipped with panic. "Good morning to you too, sweetheart," she said evenly. "Jennifer from Coastal Realty called. She said you bought a house. A $3 million house. Tell me that isn't true." Margaret turned her gaze toward the water, watching a lone sailboat cut the horizon. "It's true. It's beautiful. You should come see it." Silence on the line. Then, a sigh heavy enough to carry his judgment through the phone. "Mom, this isn't you. You don't make decisions like this without consulting us." Her lips curled in a small smile. Perhaps you don't know me as well as you think. For the first time in years, Margaret felt her pulse quicken, not from fear, but from possibility. The knock came just after noon, sharp and insistent, echoing through the marble foyer like the start of an interrogation. Margaret set down her glass of water, smoothed the front of her cardigan, and opened the door. Brian stood there, eyes bloodshot from a sleepless drive, suit jacket wrinkled as though he'd yanked it on in a hurry. He didn't bother with a greeting, he brushed past her, scanning the villa with a mixture of awe and alarm. "Mom," he said, turning in a slow circle, "what the hell is this?" Margaret shut the door gently, taking her time. "It's home. You can't buy a place like this. Do you have any idea what it costs to keep this up?" "The taxes alone, $32,000 a year," she said calmly. "Already accounted for." That stopped him. He blinked, caught between anger and confusion. "How?" "Dad's insurance wasn't, Brian," she interrupted softly. "When was the last time you looked at me and saw more than numbers in a bank account?" The question landed heavier than she intended. For a moment, he looked like a boy again, cornered, searching for an answer he didn't have. She walked toward the windows, the water glittering behind her like a witness. "You've been managing me, not caring for me. Checking my purchases, questioning my decisions, treating me like someone fragile. But I'm not fragile. I haven't been for a very long time." Brian exhaled, dragging a hand down his face. "Then explain this, Mom. Explain where this money came from. Because unless you won the lottery, you can't afford this house." Margaret felt the shift inside her, like a lock clicking open. She hadn't planned to tell him today. She had imagined waiting, letting him squirm a little longer. But the words pressed forward, urgent. "I didn't win the lottery," she said. "I inherited it. From Aunt Helen." The room went still. Brian frowned. "Aunt Helen?" "She barely had anything. A brownstone and some jewelry." "She had much more than you knew," Margaret replied. 7 million more. His face drained of color. The weight of the truth hung between them, fragile and dangerous, like glass about to shatter. Margaret held his gaze. "And I intend to use it. My way." Brian dropped into one of the kitchen stools as though his legs had given out. He gripped the counter, staring at the polished marble like it might provide an answer. 7 million? His voice cracked. "You kept that from me?" Margaret leaned against the counter across from him, folding her arms. "I kept it from everyone. Because I needed to see how you'd treat me when you thought I had nothing." His jaw tightened. "That's unfair." "Is it?" She tilted her head. "Since your father died, you've managed every corner of my life. Phones, accounts, even which vacations I could afford. Not once did you ask what I wanted. You just decided what was best for Mom." He rubbed his temples, a boy again in his mother's kitchen, caught between guilt and indignation. "I was trying to protect you. People your age, there it is." Her voice cut sharper than she meant. "People my age. Do you hear yourself? You've reduced me to a number in a statistic. Do you even remember who I am?" The silence between them swelled, broken only by the tick of the clock on the wall. Margaret felt her throat tighten. The anger that had kept her steady began to unravel, revealing something rawer, grief. "You know what hurt most, Brian? Not the forgotten birthdays, not even the lies about Patricia's health. It was sitting in my car last year, watching you raise a glass with her while I spent my own birthday alone. I raised you. I gave everything I had, and when I needed a little acknowledgement, you weren't there." Brian's head dropped into his hands. For the first time, he looked like a man cornered by his own failures. "I didn't know," he whispered. "You didn't want to know." The words landed like a final verdict. Then, unexpectedly, his shoulders began to shake. "Mom. I messed up. I thought I was keeping you safe, but maybe I was keeping you small. And now you've gone and proved me wrong in the loudest way possible." He gave a humorless laugh. Buying a palace on the Sound. Margaret reached across the counter, resting her hand on his. It's not about the house, Brian. It's about being seen. His eyes met hers, watery, searching. So what happens now? Margaret looked toward the ocean, the waves hammering against stone. Now, we stop pretending. And that's going to change everything. The villa's front door opened without a knock. Sarah swept in first, Patricia close behind, their faces stiff with the kind of concern that barely masks contempt. They carried folders and brochures, the smell of perfume trailing in like smoke. Margaret stayed seated at the island, a deliberate act of stillness, while Brian stiffened beside her. Margaret, Patricia began, voice syrupy, we need to talk about this episode. She slid a glossy pamphlet across the counter. Golden Years Village. Vibrant living for active seniors. Margaret glanced at it but didn't touch. Good morning to you too, Patricia. Sarah leaned forward, her tone rehearsed. Mom, we're worried. The secrecy about this purchase, the impulsiveness, it's not like you. We think it's time you considered a safer environment. Brian's chair scraped back, the sound sharp. Stop. She's fine. She's more than fine. She bought this house with her own money. With Aunt Helen's inheritance. Patricia's eyes flickered, just for a second. Enough for Margaret to notice. 7 million, Brian added, almost spitting the number. She doesn't need our oversight. She doesn't need yours. The silence that followed was brittle. Patricia's fingers tightened on her folder. Sarah's expression faltered, a crack in her practiced composure. Margaret rose slowly, her voice calm but carrying through the room. Do you know what it feels like to vanish in plain sight? To sit at a table with your own family and realize you're the afterthought, the placeholder, the duty? That's what you made of me. Year after year, I was erased so Patricia's ailments could take center stage. But I'm done playing small. Sarah opened her mouth, but Margaret lifted a hand. No more. You've mistaken my silence for weakness. My compliance for inability. But look around you. This house is proof, I don't need anyone's permission to exist. The waves crashed louder outside, as if punctuating her words. Patricia finally spoke, her tone sharpened. Independence is a dangerous illusion, Margaret. Don't confuse recklessness with freedom. Margaret stepped closer, steady, unflinching. And control dressed as concern is still control. I'd rather be reckless in my own life than managed in someone else's. For the first time, Patricia had no reply. The power had shifted. Margaret could feel it, solid as the ground beneath her feet. She poured herself a glass of wine, lifted it high. To dignity, she said. I won't give it up again. The silence that followed was final. The villa was quiet again. Patricia's perfume had faded into the air, Sarah's brochures abandoned on the counter like litter after a storm. Brian had left too, shaken but softer, promising to call tomorrow. Margaret stood alone in the great room, the sea framed in glass, dusk spilling violet across the horizon. She lowered herself into the armchair facing the water, a glass of wine warming her palm. For years she'd been the dependable presence, steady, available, easy to set aside. Tonight, she was something else. Not the caretaker. Not the forgotten guest. Simply herself. The phone buzzed at her elbow. A new message from Brian. I see you now, Mom. I'm sorry it took so long. Margaret read it twice, then set the phone face down. She wasn't ready to answer yet. Some wounds needed space, not quick words. Still, the admission settled into her chest like a slow fire. Outside, the tide was rising. Each wave struck harder against the seawall, echoing through the villa. Margaret let the sound wash over her. It felt less like a threat than a rhythm, a reminder that the world moved whether she kept up or not. She thought of Aunt Helen, her sharp laugh, her unapologetic choices. Live boldly, the letter had said. Margaret smiled faintly. Boldness had come late, but it had come. The night deepened. Lights from passing boats pricked the horizon, tiny declarations of presence in the dark. Margaret lifted her glass in their direction, a silent toast to persistence. For the first time in decades, she wasn't waiting. Not for an invitation, not for permission, not for someone else's schedule to clear. The villa hummed around her, vast and empty, but it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like room. She took a long sip, let the silence settle, and whispered into the dark, "I'm here." The words hung steady in the air, not fragile this time, but anchored, like the tide itself, inevitable and sure. Margaret leaned back, closed her eyes, and listened. The sea kept speaking, endless, untamed. She didn't need to tame it anymore. For once, it was enough simply to belong to herself.